Good morning and welcome to Come Let Us Worship, a time for us to consider all the things we need to be thinking about as our congregations consider the possibility of worshiping together again. Friends, we aren't going to solve any of this in an hour. Even if we could, the one thing I should say we've learned lately is that a lot of this will change by next week, and then it will change again probably several times before we will all be back together. But what we can do today is talk about possibilities. We can give one another parameters to consider and adapt, each of us for our own situations when we are ready. We can help each other through all of this, and that is what today is for. First, a little bit of housekeeping. You all arrived muted to this gathering. Please keep yourselves on mute unless you are invited to speak. I think we've all had enough Zoom experience lately to know that multiple unmuted microphones lead to all sorts of unexpected and unwelcome sounds. After each presentation, there will be about 5 minutes for questions, and then those who want to hang around at the end can have more time for discussion. If you have a question or want to contribute to the discussion that happens at the end, please put your name in the chat. And I will call on people in the order that the names show up. If you put fun things like good morning in the chat, I'm going to just think that they're a greeting. So when that time comes, put your name in the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and you should be able to find it online at the Reformed Church Center page at nbts.edu starting next week, so that you may look at it again, refresh your memory, share it with others. Also, this is the last Reformed Church Center event planned for this academic year. We are already making plans for an ongoing online colloquy that will begin in the fall and other programs in 2020-2021. I am pleased to be able to announce that William Ruggles Church, of Holland, Michigan, is scheduled to do our fellowship in RCA history next year. Justin Foster of Greenbush, New York, will be our fellow in Reformed worship, in addition to John Bell of the Iona community in Scotland coming in November, if all things can work in our favor. And Anna Jackson of Hackensack, New Jersey will be our fellow in RCA Women's Studies. Of course, even talking about this is the last event, this event wasn't planned, so there may be other events like this that pop up whenever there is a need. We will be listening. If you think of something that you really think we should try to respond to, you can always send me a message at jbrum@nbts.edu, and I will keep those in consideration. Please remember that while all of this is part of the ministry of New Brunswick Seminary, and we are happy to be able to do it, we can do more when we have more support. If you would like to support some of this work as a friend of the Reformed Church Center, please contact either me or Kathy Proctor, our Vice President for Advancement. Now, please allow me to introduce our speakers for this morning in the order in which they will appear, because once we get started, they're just going to go one after another. Donna Field is a graduate of New Brunswick Seminary and a DMin candidate at Western Theological Seminary in Holland, Michigan. She is an RCA minister and a registered nurse certified in bioethics, humanities, and law. And she works as a clinical medical ethics consultant for Northwell Health, and is an associate professor at the Donald and Barbara Zucker Northwell School of Medicine. She will present on the public health considerations of returning to gathered worship. Micah McCreary, president of New Brunswick Seminary, was before that president and CEO of McCreary and Madison Associates Incorporated, a psychological and human resources consulting firm, and was an associate professor of psychology at Virginia Commonwealth University for 21 years. He and his wife, Jacqueline Madison McCreary, pastored the Spring Creek Baptist Church in Moseley, Virginia for 16 years. He will be looking at the psychological considerations for a congregation returning to gathered worship. Amanda Brule will help us review organizational considerations about returning to gathered worship. She is the chief of staff at New Brunswick Seminary, where she also leads the COVID-19 Reopen Task Force. She has her Master's of Public Administration with a concentration in nonprofit management and leadership from Grand Valley State University, and has held positions in human resources, development, and administration in a variety of church and nonprofit settings. C.J. Kingdom Greer is chief musician at Maple Avenue Ministries in Holland, Michigan, president of the board of directors of the Alliance for Cultural and Ethnic Harmony in Holland, and a member of the board of trustees at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the associate director of admissions at Western Seminary. He will talk to us about music and singing together as we gather again. Finally, Daniel Meter is pastor of Old First Reformed Church in Brooklyn, New York, and has degrees from New Brunswick Seminary and Drew University. He has published extensively, and his book, Meeting Each Other in Doctrine, Liturgy, and Government, is considered one of the most important modern works on the Constitution of the RCA. He will guide us in reflecting theologically about worship in our new situation. And so we are ready to begin, and without further ado, I welcome Donna Field to talk to us about health concerns.
Thank you, James. I'm going to attempt to share a PowerPoint, so bear with me. Let's not do that. And share. How's that? We are good. All right. So thank you for inviting me to this talk, to this presentation. Everything that I am presenting is nothing new to anybody who is tuning in, unless you literally have been living somewhere as a hermit. First and foremost, what is COVID-19? It is a novel, which means it's a new strain of coronavirus, which we all get. It is a type of an upper respiratory head cold. Another type of head cold is a rhinovirus. So these are not unique to us. But in the coronavirus, the genesis of it is a zoonotic, which means it goes from non-human to human. We can think of avian flu, swine flu. We can think of Zika, even though that comes from mosquitoes. They're still non-human. Ebola, and that's the type of transmission where these types of infectious diseases start from. COVID-19 itself does fall into the category of SARS, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome. This is considered a health emergency. It is highly infectious. It is severe. It has an acute onset, and the mortality rate and the infection rate is extremely high. So breaking it all down, we can sit here and review everything that we have heard over the last couple of months. We all know that we are in what the CDC is calling social distancing. I prefer physical distancing because we're still being social. We're being social on media. We're being social by way of texts, by Zoom, by social media, Instagram. We're still connecting, but we cannot be side by side connecting. So we're staying at least 6 feet from other people. We're not gathering in groups, and we're staying out of crowded places and avoiding mass gatherings. So how long is long enough? I have had the privilege of working for a very large healthcare system that has access to not just our local and our national data, but to global data. For lay people who don't want to have to sit through the quality review meetings that I have to sit through, going through organizations like Johns Hopkins, the CDC, and even your own state's Department of Health will give you a very good idea of how the COVID-19 infection is trending. And if you go to, I normally don't do this, but if you go to the Washington Post, they have free coronavirus information. You can track your own state through that. I believe they utilize the Johns Hopkins data, and it's relatively current and up to date within 12 hours. What we need to do, anybody that wants to have a large gathering, we need to make a risk assessment that is based on the greater good, meaning the public health benefits of what that gathering means. Additionally, let's not do that. All right. Additionally, there are sanitation concerns. Whether we walk into a sanctuary or we walk into a warehouse or a school gymnasium, there has to be some sort of strategic planning once the decision to go forward to meet has happened. You should have people who can usher people through. Those people should be wearing masks. Everybody who walks into any gathering space should be wearing masks. They should be wearing gloves. They should be spacing people. They should have the knowledge, the wherewithal, the inclination, and the desire to do so. Everything should be clean. I am the type of person, when I walk into a worship space and there are pews, what is the first thing I touch when I sit down? The pew in front of me. We don't think of that rail. That should be cleaned as well. So safety precautions, which is the slide that's showing now, besides social distancing, and these are just suggestions. Once your local government has said, yes, you may gather more than 5 people in a room at 6 feet apart, here are some suggestions that you really should consider. Advise that if someone is sick, they're to go home, regardless. They could tell you that it's allergies. They could tell you that it just started. To be safe, the conversation in a very nice and gentle way should be, go home. No one at this point should enter any place without a face covering, regardless of what your local government says. This is a highly infectious disease. We don't know who is carrying it, how they're going to be carrying it, how they are going to present. So at this point, a face covering would be appropriate. Any type of sanitizer at a table going into a worship or gathering space would be appropriate. A few weeks ago, I was at the hospital that I work with. We ran out of liquid sanitizer. We all brought in baby wipes. Those baby wipes went everywhere with us in the hospital. Now, obviously, the rest of the hospital had sanitizer, but it was a good substitute when there was no sink available. Obviously, the minute there was a sink available, we all washed our hands. Have a space set up for hand washing. Whether it be an open sink in the kitchen or a utility sink, have that space set up for hand washing. Limit touching of surfaces. Like I said before, it's a gentle reminder to people though. My habit is to touch that pew in front of me for some odd reason, maybe to stabilize, I don't know. No handshaking or hugging. I mean, this is common sense at this point. We're all used to this, but going forward, I think it should be a recommendation that there should be alternate ways of greeting each other. Now, the next part is a little controversial. Have all liturgy, if you do gather in a space, in a handout to prevent repeated touching of hymnals and Bibles. And I put this here because we can utilize disinfectant, we can spray stuff, we can wipe things down, but Bibles and hymnals are paper and we need to be gentle with them because we do want to use them in some instances forever and ever and ever. So try, when you do hand out the liturgy, make sure the person that's handing it out is wearing gloves. Remind people, bring it home with you. Throw it out at home. If they can't do that, throw it out right in a bin as you're leaving your worship space with a garbage can that has plastic garbage bag in it so that that's easily removed. And no singing. This is what gets to my heart. I sing loudly and proudly in church, but when we sing, it pushes our respiratory molecules, the airborne molecules, much further than 6 feet. These are just suggestive precautions. I would not be a good ethicist if I didn't end with this. Have the conversation, advance directives. What does the person want? When somebody becomes acutely ill, when they are unable to make decisions for themselves, who do they want to speak for them when they can't? My experience with COVID-19 up close and personal is that it can strike and linger, and then the person decompensates quickly, or it strikes quickly and the person decompensates quickly. We are having the conversation the minute the person hits the ER. That is a cultural change for the institution that I work for, but it is necessary. And if there are any questions, James, I leave that up to you, how you want to manage that.
Okay, if I'm looking at the chat, so if you've got a question, throw your name into the chat right now. This is the time. Daniel Meter.
Thanks so much for this, Donna. My question for you is, what about singing with a mask on?
Okay, so I've actually done a little bit of research in this, only because the institution that I work for is doing research regarding transmission of airborne droplets through the mask from the person wearing the mask. It doesn't stop it totally, but you do have a better, what's the word? It's better if you're wearing a mask. But how is that mask made? Is it made out of cotton? Is it a surgical mask? Is it an N95? There's not enough research yet to say what blocks what. So if people want to sing quietly behind a mask, that's fine. I know some people, I know myself. Once I get going, it's hard to hold back. I myself will not wear an N95 mask if I'm leading worship. I'm not. It's not gonna, I barely like wearing them in the hospital setting. But it depends on what the mask is made of. And we are keeping on top of, especially now that people want to move more out into the congregational setting, I can tell you that there's more research happening in that realm of PPE, personal protective equipment.
Okay. We got a bunch of questions about singing, and I'm going to defer them all to when CJ comes in, but I will call on people who were asking about other things. David Redman. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, my question was simply, could Ms. Field define decompensates?
Sorry. So decompensate is when somebody is in a normal state of health and then they're not. And that could be, they could have a slight fever, but it is a word that is used acutely when the person goes from normal to really not normal. So if you think of a diabetic who has a normal blood sugar, takes too much insulin, and then they within minutes, and for some people it could be seconds, they are not in a normal state of health. That's decompensate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jerry Ishida.
I wanted to make a comment about the advanced directive you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I've come across a resource called 5 Wishes. And in layman's terms, it explains how to fill out a healthcare proxy and what your wishes are. So I highly recommend that. And I especially recommend it because our church is a bilingual Japanese church.
Yes.
And this resource is in many different languages, including Japanese. So if you are serving a bilingual congregation, I think this is a good place to start.
Yes. If you're in New York State, compassionandsupport.org is a site that links up to health.gov in New York State. That also has good information.
Okay, we're doing our normal New Brunswick thing, which is that we're beyond time. Yeah. So I'm going to move us right along and call on Michael McCreary for psychological considerations.
Good morning. In talking about psychological, I've got a 15-minute presentation I'll do in 5 minutes, so I will speak rapidly and fast. The slides will be available. I wanted to start with my recommendations and then come back to those as well. Recommendations are to really think critically is my first recommendation. That means to read, to listen, to have dialogue and conversations. That's the first thing I think we can do as we return back, is spend much more time growing our minds, challenging our minds, and engaging our minds. The second is to act justly, to engage in spiritual matters of social significance, to support our churches, to do meaningful works of mission would be the second recommendation. And then third would be to lead faithfully, which is to continue conducting sermons, webinars, lectures, and things on social media, to not stop because we have moved to a new opening situation. Now, where does that come from? I thought about this as far as psychologically from a perspective of mental health and trauma. And of course, I'm informed by Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And in there, he talks about, of course, being a psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor, that there was this issue of the stimulus, the pain, the hurt that happened. And then there's the need to respond to that pain. And what I love about Frankl, what he says is that you can get this stimulus and there's this need to respond, but there's this pause in the middle. There's this dash in the middle. There's this moment in the middle where you can actually consider something different. You can do something different. And I want to talk a lot about that pause. Brueggemann talks about it as well when he talks about the spirituality of the Psalms. He says there's some Psalms that are oriented Psalms, where they orient you to God and they orient you to the creation and all the wonders there. But there are a number of Psalms that are disorienting Psalms. They're disorientation stage where, you know, I'm in the valley, I'm in the midst, I feel disgust and loathing, I'm lost, I'm without hope. But then there are the new orientation Psalms, how you come out of the disorientation stage. And I think we're in that disorientation. And unfortunately, I think it becomes very comfortable. I was talking to several pastors, one who may have served 2,000 before the pandemic and now online is serving 9,000 online. Another who had 50, but is now doing 70. And it's like there's this increase in the people that we touch during this time of disassociation and disorientation. And so we really need to think about that as well. And then my third piece is that Holy Saturday concept, where we learn in that pause to be silent. It's between the crucifixion Friday and the resurrection Sunday. There's this Holy Saturday where we have to deal with that as well. What do we do in that time? Just a few things. I am trained in a dialectical behavioral therapy, that should be DBT. And dialectical behavioral therapy, there are 4 interventions that we really use over and over and over again. Distress tolerance, emotional self-regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, and mindfulness. I will briefly go into those. Distress tolerance is really where you focus on issues of tolerance, of the minister's tolerance, the parishioner's tolerance, tolerance of negative emotions. Negative emotions are what really get us into a lot of difficulty. It is the negative emotions, and particularly psychologically, we think about the fact when those emotions are inhibiting our psychosocial spiritual functioning, and that's what they do. And so you, rather than escaping them, you really want to help people deal with them. I feel this wrath, I feel this rage, I feel this disabilitating sadness, and to really recognize that I've got to learn to tolerate that and to come up with a way of dealing with that. We use exposure therapy, systematic desensitization, deep muscle relaxation. Like in deep muscle relaxation, you tense first and you feel the pain of the stress, the trauma, the tightness, and then you release and feel the relaxation. And you want to help people do that kind of thing. The second part of it is emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is to focus on really strategies to manage and change the intense emotions. And so here is not just being able to tolerate them, but I recognize I also may need to change them because they are causing problems. And so how do you do that? And that's really where scripture, memory comes in, prayer, meditation, positive self-talk, where you can really tell yourself, slow down. You're talking extremely fast. People will not know what you're talking about. I would do that and use that, but because I've got to keep going, I'm going to keep speeding up. The next one is interpersonal effectiveness, which are techniques that allow the pastor, allow the parishioner to communicate with others in assertive, self-respectful, relationship strengthening ways. We tend to come out of the pause being passive, being whiny, taking mess from people. And I'm just not that way. I don't think we need to become, overly aggressive and hurtful, but we need to recognize what are our boundaries. What are my ways where I'm now being put into a situation, I call it transactional analysis, where you're being put in a situation where you're now the victim and someone's a persecutor and someone has to be the savior. How do you get out of that system? Susan Scott talks a lot in her book on Fierce Conversations about really identifying issues and coming up with ways to talk about it as well. And then finally, one of my favorites is mindfulness. And mindfulness is really focusing on improving your ability to accept what is and to be in the present current moment, whether it's good, bad, or better. And that's a piece of it right there. I love Tai Chi, Taekwondo, ways of just really relaxing and going with the flow and letting the motion be in you. One of the tricks is mindful eating, where when you're eating, say, a piece of fruit, for example, you really take the time to chew it very well, to savor the sweetness, the flavors of it, and just really stay in that moment of what it is to eat that fruit. So that's there. Back to the recommendations again. So with that, how can you think critically in all of this? You want to read, you want to listen, you want to have conversations like this particular presentation we're doing today. You want to do acts of justice and you want to act justly. That keeps us, as we re-enter, we reopen, from really just becoming so focused on ourselves to really focus on others, and then to lead faithfully is the bottom piece of that, where you really want to do things, act in ways that are faithful, that bring about change as we come out of this pandemic. Thank you.
Okay, Micah, this question comes from Liz Hance, but she's on a phone, so she can't, doesn't have all the controls the rest of us have at the moment. She wonders about suggestions on how to deal with the sense of collective mourning that so many of us are feeling right now.
Yeah. With the mourning, one thing is to really get pictures, to really, whether you get them from online of the person, from Facebook or wherever else, or you have them in your home or on your camera, on your phone, but to really get those and to do a ritual of remembrance around those kinds of things. And to celebrate them, Zoom can be used for those kind of processes where the community's together around the Zoom media and are actually sharing these thoughts, these experiences, these memories of the person. You want to keep it as positive as you can. You don't really want to get into the negatives memories. That only exacerbates the trauma and the grief as well. And the other piece is to be kind to yourself and kind to others. To just not beat yourself up and beat others up for choices, for things that happen, but to recognize, I'm going to be caring and loving to myself while I do this as well. And to really do this. There are a lot of others, but those are just two that come to me about the top.
Okay, David Redman, you had a question. Could you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Was how can we do mission responsibly in a time that is still either shut down or very very restricted in terms of interacting with people in the world? Yes.
I'm a blood donor, and it's been very, very difficult to give in this climate. But to really, recognize what I do when I go to give is I suit up with something that I can wash immediately when I get home. I put my mask on, I wash my hands before, after, during, whatever I can. I'm just very aware of who I talk to, who talks to me while I'm there. When I get home, I remove my garment and immediately put them in a bag and then wash them later to make sure I didn't bring anything home. So you pick missions that can work for you. That's one that works for me. The other is I've been really engaged in a lot of conversations with persons on Facebook all around our country to just really share my gift in psychology and ministry with others as well. I think too, my wife and I have sent a lot of money. I'm typically, I don't like toxic charity. I don't like to just give, but in this time, that's one thing I can do is send to agencies that have a need during this time as well. So it's really that way. It's allowing the person I work with to have the freedom and the flexibility to do things as well and to do that. So staying within our, yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, I don't see any more questions right this minute, so let's move ahead and talk about getting organized with Amanda.
Good morning. I'm so glad to be with you today. And as James said, my name is Amanda Brill, and I am the Chief of Staff at New Brunswick Theological Seminary. I think at this point we can all agree on one thing. We are all doing things that we never thought we would have to do, and we have all learned a lot in the past 8 weeks or so. So I'd like to share just a few things during this time as we have discussed what the reopening for New Brunswick looks like. I want to be sure to say that each one of our situations is going to be very different as we look at reopening, whether it's a school or whether it's a church. Even within our churches, every plan is going to be unique. Some of those things that are that are unique about us, that are going to change the way that we do reopening, is going to be about our size. A smaller church versus a larger church, that reopening will look different. The location, this virus is different in different places, the demographics of your church, how many you have in a vulnerable population, those types of things are all going to change what your reopening is going to look like, and your culture, the culture of your church, what you see as important or most important, what your values are. Those are all going to determine what the reopening of your workplace, of your church looks like. And I also want to say, please listen to whatever your public health officials say around reopening. We're here to give some tips and things like that, but it's your public health officials and the authorities in your area that are really going to dictate when most of this happens. So what I'll be talking about more is less about when to do this and more about how to do it. So the first thing we did here at New Brunswick was to create a reopening task force. We created this task force and we met online. We made sure as we looked at who was going to be on this task force that we picked people from different departments, people with different points of view on whether, people who never want to come back to the workplace, and people who would, if they could, they'd be there every day. So you want people who are going to be eager to come back into church, and people who might be a little bit more resistant, maybe because they have their own health concerns, maybe because of other things going on. So when you think about who you want to put on that, think about putting lay people as well as people in your church leadership. Have people from all parts of your ministry, from your children's church to people who are doing music, hospitality, outreach. You want all of those perspectives. If you have people within your church who might have insight, who are health professionals or work in business or HR, those would be other things that you may want to bring into this conversation as well. So the next thing we did as a task force was we looked at what our values were. So what are the things that that came up as the things that we really wanted to be able to compare what our plan was with, are we really fulfilling what our values are? So obviously one of those for us was health, the health of the people within the school. Another thing that we talked about is we wanted to depend on science. So we really wanted to look into why we were doing the things that we were going to suggest to do. Were we just doing them because that's what we read on Facebook, or were we doing these because we had actually researched and decided this was the best way forward? So yeah, you'll just want to talk about what those values are within that task force as you go to look at reopening them as well. We found it really helpful to think about reopening in terms of phases. So this can be a helpful way in organizing it. If you've been listening to how many of the states are doing this, this is in a phased way. So we started with phase 0, which is where we are right now, which is basically, no one is allowed in the building unless it's essential that they be in the building. For you all, for churches, this is being fully online. Maybe one person is a building, but mostly everybody is experiencing worship online. So a phase 1 could look like perhaps you're going to have musicians or the leaders of the worship service spaced out within your sanctuary. that could be a phase one. This is going to look different for each person, and this is all going to depend on who is on your leadership team and all of those types of things. But that would be an example of perhaps what a phase one would look like. Perhaps a phase two would be limited congregants. So, you know, maybe you're talking 25% capacity or something along those lines, where you would have people spaced out. You wouldn't have children's church, perhaps. You would encourage those who are in the vulnerable population to continue to engage from home. I think that's one of the important things, is we want to figure out how we can continue to engage those who are not going to be able to come back to church, maybe within any of these first 4 or 5 phases. So, you know, a next phase might be being able to open the children's ministry. But there again, each one of these phases is going to have its own kind of recommendations that you're going to have to come up with around each of those areas. And as you think about those phases, what it will help is, if for some reason there is a resurgence in your area, or you have some sort of an issue, you can kind of go back to a previous phase, decide if you're going to go back to phase 0 for a while, and then reopen gradually again. So that was really helpful for us in having a grasp of, it's not that today we're closed and tomorrow we're going to be full and open, but that this can be a gradual reopening. And as you talk about those values, it may be that you have a huge value for fellowship and being together. And so maybe you decide to do some sort of outside church type scenario during this, you know, like I said, each situation is going to be different, but helping think through phases helps us to not think it's 0 to 100 in one day or in one Sunday. So as the next thing we did was we talked about policies and guidelines. So what kind of policies and guidelines need to be made in order to move forward? So for staff policies, you know, it's things like a disclosure policy and a return to work policy. And this goes along with your congregants as well. So what's your disclosure policy? Are you going to ask people to let you know if they've been at church and if they start to have symptoms? You know, those types of things. What's their responsibility to you in trying to in disclosing that they may have symptoms or they've been tested positive for COVID-19? And then what's your responsibility back to your congregation and to your staff to tell them that that an individual within your church, you have to be careful about privacy issues. So be sure not to say this person has it unless, or this person has symptoms, unless you've received permission from that person. So that's going to be a big deal as well. Make sure that you keep that privacy there. So like I said, you'll want to have that for your staff if you have a staff at your church, and for your congregants. And then a return to building policy would be after you have had it or had symptoms, had COVID-19 or had symptoms of COVID-19, what's the procedure for coming back into the building? How long does somebody need to wait between when they last had symptoms or since when they last tested negative, or those types of things? And then you'll also want to update any cleaning policies or guidelines, look at all of those, see what your tasks are, what your checkoffs are, make sure that you expand that, as Donna was talking about, the railings that we don't think about, those types of things, and make sure that you're posting those types of cleaning for personal hygiene as well around the building. So those are all things that your task force can help you to think of and to create. I think it's really important not to do this alone, but to have buy-in from the entire church. And with that, it's really important to communicate what's happening, and communicate what going forward, how you're going to help prepare the church to reopen. So any questions?
Joanna Tipple, would you like to go ahead and unmute yourself? I think you had a question.
Yes, hi, thank you. So my congregation, the one that I serve, are people in their 70s through their 90s. I and my music minister and the office manager are the 3 youngest, and 2 of us are 60. So every one of your suggestions are awesome, except that I feel like our congregation, and people have told me they're not going to come back even if we have permission to, because they have their own health concerns. I also can't do much online in terms of worship because very few of them have computers, and even less want to use the computer. So any suggestions?
Yeah, I have some thoughts just off the top of my head. One is, you're right, this is going to be different for each individual and for each church. And you're in a very unique, we know there are many churches that are like that. So one thing that I might suggest is with Zoom, you can do it over phone. So if people are willing to call in, that's one way. Like it's not going to be like normal worship, but it is one way that you can connect as a fellowship, as a community, to do some of the church through that. I have also been really surprised. Part of my work at the RCA, we looked at how many older individuals had iPads. So a lot of people don't have computers at home, but a lot of them have iPads. And if you can make it simple enough for them to be able to do on that, that can possibly help. But again, if you have people who are struggling with that, we do still have phone, and there are phone conferencing. There's actually free phone conferencing things online that you might be able to get. And there again, you're just going to have to figure out, what does that phase look like? And maybe part of that phase is for you all is down the line. One of the phases is you being able to go in front of people's houses and speak from 6 feet apart to make that connection. Thing with wearing masks, so there might, like, your phases are going to look very different because of who your population is. And so each situation is going to be unique in that way.
Thank you.
Jill Fensky.
I will unmute. Thank you, James, for doing this. My question goes around policies, putting policies and guidelines into place, which I think is wise. But I wonder, here in Northeastern New Jersey, our frontline workers, people who really have not been trained to do so, are the ones who are kind of enforcing the mask thing. And I'm wondering about, how do we enforce, probably a bad word, those policies, and who does that? Is it the pastors, the elders, the deacons? Do we train people? There you go. There's my question.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things. I think, first of all, there's that idea of education. So educating people for why you're doing it is going to be a huge thing for people. So when you send out the email saying we're going to be requiring masks, and then you put down why that is. So it's for the protection of others. It's for their own protection. It's in order to be an example and to protect our first line workers. Like all of those things are part of why. And I think education is really important in that. For the actual, enforcement of it, I think you will have to train people on if somebody's not wearing a mask, how do you talk to somebody about that, having masks available there, so it's not like you just can't come in, but here's an option. Or if you're still doing it online, like, that's another way of saying, if you're not comfortable wearing a mask, you could also join us online for now. Those would be all types of suggestions that I would have around that. But I think a lot of it is about education and helping for people to understand it's about a group effort in this, and that we're trying to protect the people within our church. And that's really the reason why we're doing the mask covering. I'm assuming that'll be easier for your in-church and harder perhaps for your mission work if you have people missionally coming into your building. But then again, you might want to just move those things outside because it would be safer in that sense.
Okay. We're going to need to move along right now. We'll have some more discussion time at the end. So I'm going to call on CJ Greer, and he's going to talk to us about this bugaboo about how we're going to do music.
I'm glad to be in the service. Glad to be in the service. I'm glad to be in the service one more time. That's a song that I used to sing when I grew up in Idlewild, Michigan. And it's also a refrain that I hear from the mothers of the church when we go and visit them for Easter and for Mother's Day to drop some stuff off. They said, when are we going to come back? And we said, well, Mother Betty, Mother Hilda, it might be a little bit because we want to keep you safe. Let me say, singing in the congregation is such an important piece. I'm actually going to, I just uploaded about 4 various articles that I'd invite you to take a look at. Some of them have some video instructional things that you might offer to your congregation on some tests that have been done or some scenarios that have been done. Just look at them briefly when you get a chance. I want to encourage, as I talk about singing, a progression. First of all, I want to encourage you to think about an outdoor drive-in service as your first re-entry. Everybody stays in their cars. The people who are leading, potentially 2, 3 from the front, socially distanced. The pastor all of those people are outside and away from each other, but are visible. It takes a couple of things, potentially a sound system. Don't forget your noise permit, city noise permit. It could take on connecting with a radio station and being aired at the same time. You may have to change the time of your service when you do that, but consider that. When you move from that, you may still stay outside if it's possible, and you may do shares, socially distanced, 8 to 10 feet apart, maybe groups in 2 or 3 for some families, and still potentially move to that. And ultimately, and maybe that's at the end of the summer, maybe that's next year, you move into the sanctuary. And then I might encourage you to think about shifting from 25-piece, 45-piece, 75-piece choirs to somewhere between 2 and 10, depending on the capacity of your sanctuary. It's my intention whenever we come back to do rehearsals to actually invert. So we normally sing from the choir loft. What we'll do is probably rehearse whenever we do from the pews so that we have a lot more space and we can socially distance. And then we'll probably space people out, not just in the choir stand, but on the pulpit and or stage as well. I'm wondering, everybody's congregation is different. What's the space between your congregation and the choir stand or the platform? You may have to create 10 to 20 feet between your people singing and or preaching and the choir stand. So that means the first few pews may not be accessible. You may want to not have anyone in there. Whatever the genre of music, I want you to make room for pastoral care. Songs that they can recall at home the coming week, songs of comfort, of assurance, of celebration, lament, hope, and uncertainty. And if they're not in your repertoire, I want you to add them. Do more than, but I want to caution you, don't do more than 2 songs in the service, 2 new songs in the service. Sorry about that. As people don't sing to unfamiliar stuff. The case that I want to encourage you to think about is not singing. What does that look like? Well, it will be difficult for some. And some churches, it will be impossible for them to do. But what we want to be concerned about is aerosol particles, right? So what would, for congregational singing, what would it be for masks, as was mentioned, to be used? What would it be for congregational singing to cease? And we would be led in singing just from listening from a solo or soloist or an ensemble. So you know, singing produces 6 times more particles than normal speech. What would it be to move a song, a congregational song, at the end of the service, if you have to sing a song with masks, at the end of the service, so that people are not in there with all the particles? My time is up. I have a couple more things. Remove your Bibles and I'm gonna get in trouble for that one, and your hymnals. And somebody suggested paper, and I'm suggesting projection. Oh, I know. We're in a different time. So I want to suggest projection. And you can, those of you who are hymnal bound, you can, through CCLI's hymnal and music repercussion license, you can project the page of the hymnal. So just there's some caveats to that, but there's something in there for you as well. Consider adding additional services so that you're spaced out and you have less people, and then the more you're spaced out, the less aerosol particles you have. Consider this: a radio ministry or a phone church, or advertising on your local TV station, not advertising, having your service on your local TV station. Strongly encourage people who must sing, if you decide not to sing congregational songs, to join you from home and sing as loudly and robustly as possible. I am not a doctor, and neither do I play one on TV, but I did leave you some nuggets of wisdom in this. We are considering, whenever we come back, potential plexiglass for ensembles, potential clear shower curtains, all of those to break barriers. There are a number of things, if you must do singing, that you can do. A good friend of mine and a mentor who loves congregational singing has John Whitley. Some of you know him at Calvin University. John, I thought I'd never hear him suggest this, but he does suggest that we put a moratorium on congregational singing for now. I'm going to leave us with that.
Okay, hang on, I'm trying to. Okay, I see a lot of comments. Nobody just putting up a name. Does somebody want to just ask a question? Does somebody want to ask a question who maybe felt inspired like a good minister to write the whole question out? Because, you know, we write out what we're going to say, and then we say it, and then we write out what we've said. I don't see anybody jumping in with their names right now. So we're going to move on to Daniel, and then we'll have more time for open discussion at the end. So Daniel Meter is going to help us reflect a little theologically.
Good morning. Thank you for the privilege. Am I coming through? Is my sound good? All right. There's an earlier and fuller version of this on the 12 blog. And what this is sharing with you a conversation we're having in our consistory. So where we go with the sacraments might be different than where you're going. This is not our right or wrong, although there are some theological principles that I want to share. So at Old First, we celebrate Holy Communion every week, and this has been challenging for us, but we have learned to celebrate Holy Communion at home via Zoom, and it's hardly ideal, but at the same time, we've gained a few unexpected gifts. But now in our pilgrimage from social isolation to full communion, and in stages like the children of Israel, how should we share the sacraments without touching? First, 4 general remarks. First, a warning. In this special pilgrimage, we may allow special practices, but the danger is the special becoming the new normal, so be warned. Second, the sacraments are divine pledges, small miracles, signs and wonders, and the Holy Spirit is sovereign in them and not constrained by the cultural particulars of how we offer them. God's pledges hold, and yet over time, the way we offer the elements may well confine and constrain how they speak to us. The wonder's still there, but the signs may say less depending on how we do it. 3, and yet the sacramental signs are rich enough that our varied practices bring out different meanings. The way we celebrate them during the pilgrimage may bring out new aspects of their signs and wonders, and that would be a gift. 4th, the sacraments are combinations of words, elements, and actions. The words and most of the actions are usually performed by pastors and elders in some combination, although the most important action in communion is by the congregation, which is the eating and the drinking, and the most important action in the baptism is by the baptizand, simply receiving the baptism. But pastors are not priests, And during the pilgrimage, the pastor and elders can be actively responsible for the words and actions, even while deputizing other persons to do the actions. It's going to be a major principle here, what I'm saying. Holy baptism. Scripture gives us warrant for persons being deputized to apply the baptismal water. So a parent or guardian can be deputized to hold the child and apply the water with the pastor and elders at a distance, and to repeat after the pastor the baptismal formula, so-and-so I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. For an adult, someone safe could be so deputized. I can even imagine an adult putting the water on herself, witnessed by the loose circle of believers, all at safe distance, with someone else saying the words. In our case, the elders will prepare the water 24 hours beforehand with a little bleach, which will evaporate in that time. We may infuse the water with lemon or frankincense. We will dispense with our custom of anointing, which is not essential. We'll have opportunities to bless, anoint later on, God willing. Holy Communion. Whatever else you do, you've got to break the bread. The formula of he took, he blessed, he broke, he gave occurs 11 times in the New Testament, and St. Paul said that he got it directly from the Lord. For our Zoom communions, each household breaks their own bread. And we're going to talk about bringing this with us on our first stage of pilgrimage back. We will encourage people to bring their own bread, like the children of Israel coming to the tabernacle. But we will also have bread available on the tables for the taking, probably nice substantial crackers, which in world terms are bread, more like world bread than Wonder Bread is. As long as they're breakable and real food, I think that's important, which communion wafers are not. It's got to be real food. To use previously cut up little cubes of bread is to miss the sign of breaking, even if the Spirit does the wonder. At the words of institution, everyone will take up their own pieces of bread, raise them to bless them, break them, and where safe, share them and eat them. For the cup, intinction is out of the question. We will probably put out small cups on tables already filled for people to take to their pews. I think allowing everyone to fill their own cup brings in too many issues. At the words of institution, we will raise and drain our cups together, like we're raising a toast to the Lord from Psalm 116. People who are shy of the cup will be encouraged to commune in one kind during the pilgrimage with explanations. Finally, about ordinations and confirmations. On sacraments, we're Calvinist, not Zwinglian, but there's no difference on ordinations and confirmations, which are biblical disciplines, not divine pledges. They are signs, not wonders. Without denying the Holy Spirit's work in them, laying on of hands and anointing are enacted prayers by us and signs to the church and to the world. So at confirmations, a safe person may be deputized. At ordinations, similar, and the pilgrimage may provide a corrective. At our RCA ordinations, the laying on of hands has gotten out of hand. A crowd of clergy and elders hides the sign from the congregation, and it suggests a welcome to the clergy club. The sign is not for the fellow clergy, but for the faithful on behalf of the church and the world. Therefore, have only one, or maybe three, but probably one officer performing it in full view of the congregation. Maybe later, three. The right hand of fellowship has also gotten out of hand with hugging and embracing and lost its biblical reference and meaning. It's not about personal affection, but a welcome to the fellowship of office. So during the pilgrimage, let one officer give the handshake and everyone else a raised hand or the Muslim style hand on the chest. And that's my conversation for our consistory during the stages of our pilgrimage.
Okay, let's start off with any questions that might be particular to Daniel's part of the presentation, and then we'll move into some more general discussion. Just post your name on the chat if you've got a question. And there's been a lot of chat going by, so if you posted a question, posted your name a few minutes ago, post it again, please. I'm getting a lot of thank yous to you, Daniel.
You're welcome. And also with you.
Okay, David Redman.
How can an ordination take place on Zoom?
Mm-hmm.
An ordination to elder or deacon, I can imagine that, as long as I think there needs to be someone cleaned up and designated, some other person cleaned up and designated within the same pod or bubble who can perform a laying on of hands and repeat whatever words are passed along by the officer in charge. If that's a child, a spouse, a neighbor who's in your same bubble. Again, our ordained hands don't carry some magic or electricity. It's a demonstration, a visible demonstration and a prayer. A child's hands could do it.
Okay. Anybody else? Or go ahead and move into more.
A pagan's hands could do it. A pagan child's hands could do it.
Okay, yeah, I've got some Lori Jonkman commenting on how she was ordained via Zoom. Let's move into more general discussion. If you post your name, we can call on you and unmute you and you can talk. Jill Fensky.
Dan, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about it. I love the phrase re-pilgrimage. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, again, sort of like what Amanda said, we're in stages. It feels like a pilgrimage. I think of the Exodus, where the children of Israel had an experience of God that was not meant to be permanent. The promised land was the permanence, but yet at the same time, during the Exodus, they had a very powerful experience of God that was temporary, and the things they did in the Exodus were different than the things they did in the promised land. And I think you need to maximize, as during this, that we're in a sense of movement, and the movement takes time, and the movement has gifts. And yet at the same time, the Christian life is a constant dialectic of being at home and being on pilgrimage. And therefore you want to not drain, but you want to gather every special gift that's in this time of poignant longing and waiting and moving.
Okay. Okay, Paul Jansen. Paul, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm wondering, sparked a bit by Daniel's last comment, for our Jewish brothers and sisters, the faith is essentially at home, an at-home thing to begin with. Of course, they have gatherings, but I'm wondering what we might be able to learn from them if folks have either direct or indirect experience in terms of communicating and celebrating and acting the faith essentially at home in ways that we're not accustomed to.
I'll just say briefly, we've had that experience with home communions, and we based it on the Seder. We based it on the Shabbos meal that the mother does at home, and we included things like lighting the candle and so on. But that's exactly right.
Okay. We've had a little bit of discussion going on in the chat about how do we find the video, and Steve Mann, who is our disembodied voice in this webinar, who's running everything for us, has put up the link in the chat for where the video will be available. I will make sure that the link gets posted in the comments for this event on the Facebook page so that you'll be able to find the link, and that will take you to the videos and you can replay and relook. We'll also try, we did this with social distancing in the supper. I will try to glean out from the comments the things that aren't just hi everybody, but are running commentary and discussions, and try to have those posted as well. The YouTube video is also on our Facebook page. Anybody else got any questions, discussion, either for Daniel or for anybody in the group? Also, Nancy Weber's asked to post the links with the music resources. I will do the best I can with that. Hopefully that will work. Can we get a draft or a template of the New Brunswick Task Force plans, Amanda?
Yeah, we can figure out a way to do that. I'm thinking, James, this time we might want to send a follow-up email to all those who had registered that would have some of these resources directly on them, or attachments to them. So yes, we can work on or we can post those on the website,
yeah,
where the video would be. So we can make those accessible.
We'll try to be belt and suspenders with this and do both, but. Okay, anybody else? CJ is also going to send his stuff to me so it can get reposted.
Again on what Paul said about what we learn in home communion. Some of our churches, I used to do this in my first church, especially the Hungarian church in South River, regular home visitation, regular home communions, delivering communion to home. I don't know if you still do it. It's probably done less now that we have more frequent communion, but people would expect, old Dutch and old Hungarian people would expect the elder and a pastor to come and deliver home communion. And those were pretty special celebrations. And we had one woman in my first parish who loved it so much that she sent to her relatives in Hungary and had special tablecloth and communion paraments made for her bedroom, handmade communion paraments for when we brought home communion. So I think that home communion is a very powerful thing that we've somewhat rediscovered in these last few months. People are baking their own bread, setting tablecloths, candles, all that kind of thing.
Okay, George Montanari, I'm going to call on you.
Yeah, really just the comment that another webinar I'd attended, folks recommended making sure that you can keep your supply of cleansing supplies available, but you don't have to open and close and open and close. Make sure you have a good supply chain of that.
And James Riley was asking then about, in response to some of that in the chat, about whether anybody knows about a place where churches can buy hand sanitizer and masks to make them available. Anybody know?
So I can't guarantee it, but from what I've seen on Amazon is they're slowly getting some of these things in and they are becoming more widely available. So I think as more time goes on, there will be more access to them. But I think one of the things that we've learned is you can't be picky about what kinds you want and things like that. But know that those things do, as production catches up with what the demand was and things have been switching over, hopefully those will come in more supplies. And when we can't find them locally, then you could try online. But I don't have a specific site or anything to try.
And once again, on liturgy, you may want to incorporate cleansing into the liturgy in part of the stages, you may want to include some of the cleaning of your sanctuary as part of what you do in the worship service. I mean, in a symbolic way, it may part of your ritual that we're cleaning here, that we wash. You need to celebrate, instead of being secretive about it, you need to celebrate it, that's what we're doing. That's part of the pilgrimage of stages.
Jan Fritzinger, I'm going to call on you to say hello.
I had a question about wearing latex gloves. Since I'm a chaplain and are in a hospital, we have been discouraged not to wear latex gloves, but to, hand sanitize and wash more often. In fact, we're not even allowed to go through in the morning as we're entering with gloves on. So I'm wondering what the take is. Overall, there seems to be two schools of thought about this.
Yeah, I'm wondering if.
Thanks, Donna.
Yeah, I can answer that. So there are many schools of thoughts when it comes to wearing gloves. We get complacent. We put the gloves on, we touch everything, and then we touch everything again. Mm-hmm. So, obviously wearing gloves at the bedside when you're touching the patient, and then the gloves come off and they go into the garbage. And then you wash your hands. Same can be said out on the outside. If you put your gloves on specifically for one action, let's say you don't want to put your hands on a shopping cart, you put the gloves on, you handle the shopping cart, but now what do you do when you're handling the food with those gloves? So all in all, honestly, washing hands is best. Using hand sanitizer is best. But hand sanitizer is really only good for 3 applications. You do have to wash your hands at some point. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So being mindful and being aware. And I think I wrote in the chat that wearing gloves makes us complacent. We think we're being protected or we're protecting others, when in essence, at some point, you're distributing whatever germs you're touching. So washing hands would be best, honestly.
Thank you. That was very helpful to me.
Anybody else? Lots of good commentary in the chat, but other people who have questions that we want to bring into the discussion right now. Lisa Hansen.
This might be for Dr. McCrary. I'm working with a bunch of chapels, and they're in what I would consider the wild, wild west, Arizona, Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, Mississippi. And those are places where the local churches have opened wide and are doing things that involve singing and hugging and touching and large group gatherings. And I have people who are not allowed to do that on the basis. How do we deal with that psychologically when one church or a chapel is not doing what everybody else around them is doing? And I'll mute.
We pray. That's a tough one. There's so much going on with the different ways that we're actually competing politically, and our purposes for that, and what that all means has become a part of it. So for me, again, is having those really, really, really tough conversations about that issue. That even this is here, we're not able to communicate to evoke change, to make any kind of entrance or help them in any sort of way, but we're still brothers and sisters in Christ. And how do we do that? How do we have those kind of conversations? To not accept it as defeat, but to accept it as a reality. And from that perspective, moving forward.
Arlene Wilhelm.
Yes, James. I want to know from Dan said that wafer for communion is not bread. Why is that so? I thought it was made from bread.
Yeah, well, the question is how much, again, it's a judgment call. How much does it look like real food? How much is it like, I mean, the point about, it seems to me the point about the symbol of the bread, especially when you base it on Old Testament sources and you take, is that it's supposed to be like connect to real food.
Yeah, how is it different from a cracker then? You know, I mean, it's similar.
If people eat real wafers during the week,
Okay, yeah.
That's the point. The point about the crackers is what people eat during the week normally.
Okay, the reason why I asked is that Cokesbury offers a little kit that has a little juice and a wafer in it, which I have used, but I never thought about it as having to be real bread.
I write about those. I write about those little cups in the 12 piece. I won't say anything about it here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan.
Run.
These names showing up. I'm not seeing anybody's new names showing up in the chat, so I'm thinking that we are coming to the end of our discussion time, which is okay. I want to thank everybody for being here and for all their different contributions to the discussion. Michael Weber wonders if it's possible for NBTS to start an online forum where we can share our questions and ideas. And Donna Field says this is a wonderful idea. We will certainly take this under advisement. My understanding, though, is that rca.org has a bulletin board that is doing this right now. And we have enough things in the RCA where we all start our little splinter group competitions with each other. I'm not sure we need to do it over the virus as well. Oh, and it turns out I was muted for all of that. We will take the idea for a discussion board under advisement. Oh, I was heard. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thank you to everybody. A special thanks to Daniel and CJ and Micah and Amanda and Donna for their presentations. To all of you for being part of this discussion. We'll get things up online as quickly as we can over the next couple days so that it should all be there by the beginning of the next work week, I hope. And you're all in our thoughts and prayers as we all try to navigate this together. Do take care, everyone. God bless.
James,
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for your moderating.